Thank you for joining us for this roundtable by Planet Underground, hosted in Las Vegas at CGA's Fall Summit. Special thanks to those joining on the live stream. If you have any questions on live stream, please submit them and we'll have the team here try to inject them into this conversation here. I'm Jimmy Wang with the Creative Partners. I'm going to have our all-star panelists on this all-star panel introduce themselves very briefly, kind of name, company, what your company does. Let's start on my left here with Shane.
Hey, I'm Shane Hart with Utilicate software for utilities, excavators, and locate companies.
Jason Manning, VP One Call Operations for PelicanCorp. We're a software and one call services company.
Hey, I'm Steve Mumm. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for GPRS, and we help customers visualize above and below ground infrastructure.
Hi, my name is Jason Adams. I'm the Executive Vice President of Irth Solutions, formerly the CEO of Irth Solutions and formerly the CEO of 4IQ Solutions. And we focus on writing latest technologies for the damage prevention industry.
I'm Mark Whelan with SeeScan. We focus on next generation locating equipment and pipe inspection technologies.
I'm Jeff Hancock. I'm with On the Spot Utility Resources. We do public and private utility locating.
All right, great. Thank you all. So I'm going to throw out the first question. It's going to be a pretty easy one, General. What are some future technologies and methods that either you're working on or you think will are on the horizon for this this damage prevention industry that you think can really benefit it and its stakeholders? So anyone feel free to start, jump in, please.
I can take this just with one off the top of my head. We talked a lot about APIs this weekend, and what an API is for anyone is an application programming interface, and computers talk to each other just like humans do. They use a language and certain protocols, and as we see, we've seen in Texas 811 too, where they bring more data in to the call center problem and have more data to cross-reference on those things there, they get better solutions, better decisions. So the APIs, we already use them for Esri to pass GIS data to different platforms in real time. The call centers need to follow a similar process where that communication is almost instant from the front end and the back end, so that we're feeding the most data that we can have to make the best decisions. And right now, it's a little bit of a bottleneck.
Jump in here too. I think, again, about data, but in my mind, the data collection is going to be something that's should already be happening, but I really think it's going to be key to the future because we've got sort of all these emerging technologies around, and I keep hearing the same thing about people saying, like, we don't have great data. And that would be like for a lot of utility companies and facility owners to not have their data is like an e-commerce company not having a database of customers. So I think that's really got to happen in order to enable a lot of the other tech that's coming down the road. So we stop hearing the, well, we don't trust our data stuff. So I'm going to say, so much stuff going in the ground now. Collecting the data is huge. Collecting the GIS data.
I think I would add to that, using different collection devices in combination with one another to create even more rich data sets. Tools that we haven't classically used in the utility locating world can provide access to things that are deeper, access or coordination with things that are above the ground. So I think there's a lot of new combinations coming to help with that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think what's interesting that we see is I think we'll talk a lot about data. We'll probably talk about AI, I hope a lot. The one thing that really is kind of ringing a bell for us is the ability to use the data and get the value of the insights out of that data. And what we're starting to see is an expansion of the conversation, right? When I first started, we were very much just looking at a ticket. Today, we're now looking at the positive response and all the different activities. So what we're doing is introducing a lot more data into the conversation. And I think that gives us a lot of alternate ways to actually get value out of the relationship. I'm super impressed with all the new organizations that are coming into our industry, because we're now seeing people invest more money And I think that's because we see the opportunity and the value of what's here. So seeing that, I think the data conversations is going to be the biggest play that we have here. But I also think some of the new tech that we're seeing is really going to kind of change our industry in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think we're in a golden age really of technology. I mean, cloud storage, 20 years ago wasn't really as much of a thing. Now it's so cheap and so readily available, it puts the power of information in the palm of anyone's hand. So I think collecting all that data becomes a lot easier when you've got a place to store it, and we've got the ability to transmit that data anywhere seamlessly and quickly where it needs to be.
And I think for me is that the validity of this data that's coming in, how it's collected, where it's going, the accuracy of it. How do you verify that? Some of these smaller municipalities that don't have accurate maps and records, what does that data look like? So,
Because they have problems too, right? Even the small municipalities, they might not have resources, but it doesn't mean that they don't have these problems just because they don't have the resources. They need to find creative ways to get that data any way you can. And with a lot of people, we talk about, well, it's got to be high quality data sometimes and stuff, but that's what the AI does later on, is you just feed it everything. The data already exists out in the world. The software and the processes is just wrapping that data so we can track it and learn things from it. And we want everything, and the AI will tell us what data correlates. And I was going to mention this before too, that when you do stats, right, you have longitudinal studies, and as you doing something just today, right, we're not going to get the most insight. We might not even know what happens in 5 years, but if we keep collecting this every time, and you might have a locate where you collect the GPS, and on that 15th time you collect that same GPS, because we're going to go, well, I collect it once, we're good. But at some point we'll get to we're GPSing every time, because I might want to know the path he took. I want to know the swing quality from the Vivax one every time, right? So it's like the same Amazon servers. At some point you have a time lapse thing, and they keep little states of your database, and that computing is so massive. There's no way that would have been available.
The one thing I always struggle with is when we come to our conferences and do things like this, we're always talking about fixing the problem that's kind of 5 feet in front of us. But at least in my experience, what I'm starting to see is I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll find repositories of data that are more accurate than the one call centers will be able to produce. Because we already are showing ways in AI on how to create those layers of kind of very specific GIS without needing GIS.
Yeah.
And so now what we're saying is the one call centers that have been so valuable as a central repository for so long still have value, but we also have to be aware that sharing that data, especially when it's being created in outside sources, has a lot of value. I think to hit on your point, making sure that it's valid data, I think is really the key of the conversation. If we start building these great ways to anticipate making better decisions, but we're not sure the fundamental soundness of the data. And so I think that's the conversation that we really need to start to get into some more.
There's probably a big shift that needs to happen in the way that data has been sort of protected, and there's been, at least in my experience, some gatekeepers to that who kind of go, no, this is sacred stuff, can't update it, can't change it, can't do anything with it. And it feels like they're going, that whole mentality is just going to get passed by because we'll actually find, and I use this example all the time when you've got anything that's crowdsourced, it doesn't matter if Google Maps says there's an Arby's down the street. If 50 people follow that there and they go, hey, this is closed, well, at some point those 50 people are probably right. It doesn't matter, and there's no feasible way for them to send someone around checking every single thing. And that's kind of the mentality that a lot of the industry has, as opposed to going, hey, this stuff gets, I think to your point, any given spot in any given city has probably been located over and over and over again in the past 10, 20 years. At some point, those mistakes are if we collect all of that information, it's just going to sort of update itself, and we're not going to need these, sort of, like I said, gate-kept, GIS sort of repositories. They're going to get left in the dust.
Look, I'm sure you experience it. We experience it now running our one call centers. They're constantly being attacked to pull data out.
Yeah,
we never
for
saw this 3 years ago. We never saw anyone trying to log into these systems and pull ticket data. And now we're seeing it in every one of our scenarios. So we're spending a lot of time trying to build walls, and what we're really hoping is that we can start building bridges and really start sharing this data and say, hey, there's real value here, instead of trying to build walls that we can't patch the holes fast enough.
Well, people, like a lot of time when I bring on customers or I'm in meetings, is a big component of software education that you're providing, as well as, the service. And when we talked about, the APIs and stuff, when I talk about Esri, we have GIS, I have people that, they're GIS experts and they're nervous around the API, and they think giving you a stale copy of the data that you can load on your laptop that they'll forget about, and that laptop could be anywhere, right? They think, well, that's a lot safer, and it's not. And what happens in these API protocols now, if someone's accessing your Esri, and we do this with some of our big utility customers and some vendors, that we're pulling that data in real time to the locator so that they can view that. And we're using that data to do things like pull high profile before it's on the locator. So we're telling the locator beforehand, hey, this is high profile. Can you tell us yes, no? So we're setting up an environment where we can crowdsource that. But the Esri on the token generation is way more secure than if you're passing stuff around manually, because then you have timestamps, you have logins, you have passwords, and you have token generation.
Back to the validity point, I think one of the key levers of technology that we can use going forward is going to be, in the past, we've kind of relied on interpretation of data. And I think we're moving towards a model where the collection of the data can actually be determined, and basically the person that's collecting that data won't have to be interpreting something. So we'll know that the data is valid and is accurate, because the machine, the locator itself, will be able to collect enough information to determine the position of the actual utility. And when that gets fed into the system, you're going to have much more accurate maps, rather than what happens in a lot of cases. The locator goes out there, collects points based on his interpretation, and that interpretation may be wrong, it may be mismarked, and then you have a wrong map, and then you get into a whole myriad of issues around that.
I think there's power in combining data sets as well. We just came out of the best practices committee where I talked about combining a private utility locating set with a Texas 811 data set. Just to give more context to that excavator who's on the ground, those utility sets do come together, and they're not mutually exclusive. And providing that context materially impacted the dig up rate for those contractors. And I think the more we can experiment with how these combinations of data can affect outcomes, the faster we'll be able to move the industry.
So on that point, keeping focused on the question, which is technology and methods, right? We come to these conferences, and a key, one of the most common themes is we need to share our data more, right? And Steve, what you talked about seems to me to be a perfect example of sharing data, right? You guys went out, and there are private facilities there that overlap with the dig area, and you like to share it with the public, and it seems like a no-brainer. And it's talking with some stakeholders. Most are supportive, but there's some trepidation. Like, isn't that a great example of sharing actionable data in this industry?
And I think it's on us to make some of those bold moves. Marathon did it with their pipeline data a few years ago. We're trying to do it more with our data sets. Someone has to be a first mover. Someone has to take some risk, if for no other reason than to experiment and pilot with what that data can produce.
It's very similar to the abandoned pipes too.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Someone talked about it took 10 weeks to find out who wanted to take responsibility of that pipe. And it's another data set that affects the excavators when they're out there trying to work safely.
Yeah.
And I think that's, the call centers come in to be like, we're servicing the excavators to make sure. And that's why adding those things, whether it's private or abandoned data, and creating a more full picture for the excavators. And I think, Jimmy, you talk about the excavators, if there's something they can do, but maybe we can incentivize them sometimes to help crowdsource, because at some point, everyone has some data. You do the job today, that's great. But if you collect a little bit of data every time, there's a play down the road for you to add value on what you've been collecting over time. And everyone will be able to share their data in a safe method, and it's just going to build all these stories here. We need to accelerate that.
Even if for the abandoned stuff, which is, we've talked about this before, where, as you said, if everyone is out there doing it, and people find abandoned facilities, if they collect that data, if that's shared in a way, the technology to keep it on the technology thing is the ability now to share that data in a much more controlled way, it's there, and it exists. It's around. I think there's just a lot of people hitting the brakes on it because they're concerned about it. But it's definitely there, and there's so many things that can be done if we, kind of just, as you said, like just take some people to start doing it, to start sharing abandoned lines, to start sharing, the data that's been crowdsourced, and people will, realize it's not going to be the end of us, and that, it actually can work, and lets us move forward. The tech is there, I think. We're lagging behind the tech because, some people have their foot on the brake.
So that's the next question, which is how much of the barriers to, like a quantum leap in industry performance are due to lack of tech, and how much of it is due to just resistance to change?
I'm going to say resistance to change. At some point, hopefully we'll catch up, and then the bottleneck will be tech. But I think right now there's so much tech that exists and the industry is not adopting it. I mean, we're talking about this is my industry and I love it, but we're talking about an industry that, still centers struggling to get rid of fax machines. There's still, because there's a great resistance to change. And it usually requires, not all that long ago, people were, centers were resisting doing tickets online. Thought, well, that's not reliable. We can't do that. That's dangerous. Why would you let people do that? And now virtually every one call in the country has the vast majority of their tickets coming in that are self-serve. In my mind, it's the bottleneck is people saying no and fear of change, as opposed to the tech, where we still have a ways to go before where the tech is the limiting factor, I think.
Yeah, tech's not the limiting factor. Resistance to change is, finances, right? I mean, I think we rarely have this conversation enough in our industry, is that we had this great goal, 50% reduction in 5 years. We have really good strategies, but one of the most important strategies is the financial strategy. How are you going to do it? What's the incentivization for all of our stuff? We want to be safe, but for vendors like myself and other ones, we want to build really good solutions that give good returns. One of the things that we really see now is the value of the data in our industry is starting to demonstrate value outside of our industry. And that's why we're seeing new people come into our industry. That's great, because now they're bringing new tech in. What we have to do is educate our audience that we've had these relationships for 20 plus years with, to say, this is beneficial, we have to invest in it. And I think we need more people to have that conversation. We're really trying to push the envelope as hard as you possibly can, tying all AI to all of our products. But the reality of it is, until we can get an audience that accepts and sees the value out of that, we can't get a whole lot of change.
Yeah, I think there's a case for the technology companies making sure that they can show the value of what they're doing. So it's not perceived as something of diminishing returns, where it's like, well, it's going to cost me a lot up front. How much more is it going to gain me in terms of damage prevention? So I think it's incumbent upon the technology manufacturers to basically present the case and develop use cases that actually deliver on what is the actual value that's derived from this.
We should be working together as an industry. I mean, look, we have so many boots on the ground and we grab great data, and the value of our industry data is incredible. But if we're not working together to do two things, validate that we have really good data, and two, then know what we're doing with that data, as an industry, it has a ton of value. But if not, we'll let other companies come in from outside. We see this already, trying to recreate our data. And that's taking the value of our industry. And that worries me, because I want the value of our industry to reduce damages. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm working so hard. What I don't want is somebody to come in and say, hey, look, I created this great data set which just duplicates what we've done here, and I'm going to use that value outside of the industry and remove the value from us. So I think that's one of the things that we're working on.
I was saying that the other day, like you build software for locating, there's not enough people, there's limited resources, there's no way they're getting all that work done. And you're like, what other industry are you building software at this level? And when you build the software, you build some really advanced features, similar thing where they're like, we're seeing now excavators look at, hey, I need a good TMS platform where I can have GIS integrations where, yeah, they're still, doing the call center, but they also have access to the publicly available maps that we're pulling in real time for them. So they can use that as a double check, because some of the stuff is, we talk about people being stuck. When you do stats, and you do correlations, and you run some regression models, you get confidence coefficients where I'm 90% confident at this level that this is a correlation. I'm 95%, confident, or 99%. And each of those is, a mathematically range on to show these things. And you see in the technology committee starting to do more case studies. And it seems like we spend a lot of time of trying to show how this stuff can keep being better. And I think we're starting to, like with that case study, see some advanced things and start to get our minds churning a little bit. We still have to carry on. Someone said the other day, really my obligation, I still have to put good paint on the ground. And yeah, that's still a thing there. But you need to start also looking at tomorrow. And we're going to be doing the things we do today while planning for the future and how we're doing things.
And how we define our industry, I think, is important. It's not utility locating. Let's call it construction. If we're part of the construction industry, we're identifying information at a specific point in time in the life cycle of a facility when it is about to be exposed. But years before that, it was installed. If that information can be used for future planning, for other projects, and then brought back to prevent damages the next time it's exposed, the data can really be helpful for all stakeholders in the construction process, well beyond just this moment in time that we're so laser focused on right now.
You see that the good excavators are the good excavators sometimes. There's a wide range of excavators out there, for sure. But like for Jeff on the spot, some of that collaboration, we see with like Centerpoint having that map, and we have issues with the map, it's all of a sudden it's an email to everyone. And everyone's working at that together with the utility and the locate company and the software vendors, which is really nice. And sometimes you don't have to go out and track, select GPS and do everything to the full. Sometimes we just say, we'll put a question of like, is this a map discrepancy? Yes, no. And the next locate that comes in can cross-reference a dig area to see, was there some doubt on mapping in this area, right? And so even if we don't have limited resources, we need to always keep trying to get better with whatever we have available to us. And sometimes people think I don't have the budget and I'm stopped, but there's some creative ways that you can really make some improvements.
Can we just talk about the problem that we just sat in a meeting about dirt and we looked at all this great information from 2023 and it's 2024 right now? Like we need, for us, it seems to be, we're trying to figure out how to prevent damages. So a damages database in real time would be the most significant contribution to this industry, I think, of anything that could possibly happen. Because then we could start training models on real-time data. Right now, we have to reserve all of our activity on our building this AI models until a year later. And it puts us behind. And no industry, there's no reason this industry can't have real-time reporting of this and the value it brings to the conversation.
The speed that these things move at, if you think about BEAD grants and, broadband construction, it tears through a state like wildfire. It goes through, there are, it's good and bad. There's things that happen with that, but the heads up that you would get with real-time data would be extremely valuable in the prevention aspect, not just in in retrospect, we look back and we see what happened last year. You'd actually be able to get ahead of it and see what's coming, where it's coming, what's going on.
Imagine
planning
if you're
stage for sure.
You see there was a damage yesterday out on the line and you go, well, maybe I should adjust a little here, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're controlling the one call center, if you have utility software, if you have contract locating, we're all talking the same. The thing is that we build these walls to prevent us from communicating the most proper information that would reduce this activity. So I think we got to get better at working together and sharing information, but we got to know how to do that in a way that it protects our clients, but it also leverages the advancements that we have, because there's a lot of knowledge at this table. What I don't want to happen is people that are not damage prevention experts telling us what the AI should say, right? I like the fact that I look at it and I go, I know I've got 30 years of this. I know that's wrong. We got to figure out what's wrong with the formula. So that's why I hope we can still accomplish a lot of that while some of us are still in this industry. I'd hate to see a whole group of people come in without a level of expertise and tell us what the AI should say.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been a scenario where someone said they would like to make a decision with less information.
True.
So I think the more information we can gather and collate and leverage AI to basically churn through that, because obviously there's more data being generated at any given time today than there ever has been in the past. And we need a method to mine through that information and pick out actionable insights. And the only way to do that is to leverage things like AI and that type of platform.
And you hit a perfect note. We got to know what questions to ask for the new data. We're so fortunate now as we start to expand on positive response and everything else that we're doing. We're introducing a lot of new fields of data into the conversation. My question is, what aren't we asking? What field of data would be valuable? You know, only like 2 tickets in the entire United States has a I'm done with my ticket and I'm not. Not a close code, but just I'm done. You know how much it would be effective for our contract locating clients to know, hey, they're done with excavating and we could pass that information along? But only 2 centers out of all of them in the US. So seeing that to ask those questions better, I think will make the data play better.
So great discussion. I want to ask, there are 2 of the gentlemen on there who work for companies who are actually in the field doing damage prevention, right? And the other 4 of you are very valuable for, but they're actually where the rubber hits the road, right? So Jeff and Steve, let's start with Jeff. How do you use new technology, you and your team use new technology in the field? What types have worked well for you and your clients? And maybe let's just focus on what types have worked the best. And then you go first, and then Steve, you could talk about just like new technology or methods. What have you and your team been able to leverage most?
I know we've experimented with some of the RTK, satellite imagery mapping stuff. So we've kind of tinkered with that. We haven't really, it's fairly new to us. So I'm just kind of developing our own accurate maps. When I talk about we do the private side of utilities. So we try to do that for our clients, develop those mappings with that type of technology, integrate that into some of our public side when you're talking about trouble locates or locates that maybe you have to expose, daylight those to see where they're at, and just mapping those for the future so that the data is accurate, and then you can go out and next time it's accurate, so the next locator knows, hey, there was an issue here, it's mapped, it's documented. It's accurate, so just kind of shoot those satellite imageries to create a accurate map for the next person that goes out. So I think that's some of the most recent things that we've utilized to collect good data for future locates.
Yeah, I would second that on accuracy. RTK is just one tool, but the combination of new tools really does help close the gap between each tool. We talk about it like Swiss cheese, right? You've got to have the right tools to make sure that you don't have any of those holes in the Swiss cheese exposed. Second, I would say completeness, doing larger scan areas so that you have more context about that whole area. A full site, a full university, for instance, gives you a lot more information than just one area where they may be looking for a sewer line to install a chiller so that they don't intersect with that. The last thing I would say is that the more that we can think about that, not just GIS, but in context more broadly, whether that's part of BIM and a BIM model. We've had some really cool projects where we've scanned a concrete slab and found all the post-tension cable, and then looked at that in context with the building plan for the bathrooms. You know, you think about a 12-story building, and those plumbing lines are going to flow all the way through 12 stories. And if you know where the post-tension cables are, now you can design around those interfaces. So I think that's just an example of where we can go beyond just a utility locator and do something really great with a combination of data.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can this industry really adopt transformative technology at least fast enough if the process flow does not change? A very quick example, many years ago, the company I was at, we were looking at doing meter readings for a utility, and they have routes every day. I'm like, okay, so what if we figure out a better way, a more efficient way to read these meters? Can I do 2 days in one day? And they're like, no, you cannot change this route. You cannot change the sequence. You cannot change the number of meters you read a day. You cannot change anything. So I'm like, okay, so basically you don't want me to improve. So can this industry really adopt and leverage these technologies if the process flow, Jason, you said you've been here for 30 years. The process flow is fundamentally the same as 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
Right. How much of the lack of progress in adopting technologies is due to kind of the example I gave? No, you have to read the same meters on every day of the month. You cannot change the sequence. You cannot do 2 days in one day. You cannot
First thing
change
I think
it.
you have to do is give our industry credit. When I started, we had fax machines, and we remember how hard it was to get emails to be accepted, right? So if you look at the nature of where we've been in the last 30 years, we know that the processes will change. But we also know it's like towing a boat across the desert. It's kind of difficult because we're in a conservative industry, and nobody wants to risk anything when it comes to, especially for protecting high energy lines or anything like that. So I think we all understand that. So the best way to get process change is show value change. And that's what we've always tried to establish, is to say, we understand the effort to make the change has to be worth the reward. What we've seen the change, I think, in our space is that we see people seeing the reward now to be to reduce damages, where previously it was how do they change the ROI to offset the cost. So that's been a great thing for us. I think that gives me hope that our industry wants to move this forward. I think having an area where we've actually planted a flag in the ground and said, hey, this is what we're going after with a real goal has helped that. But I'll tell you, it was the hardest thing in the world. We taught people how to use a mouse when I first started. And now we're talking about using hundreds of millions of data points to understand if a ticket's risky or not. I don't expect the industry to move forward at the same pace that maybe the software guys want them to move. But I would say we've come a long way already. And I think where we go in the next 5 years will completely change our industry, because I think we'll move more into understanding the value of what we do versus just the fact that we're just trying to keep a line protected underground.
I was going to say, I think as Jason said, the other Jason here has been in the industry for 30 years too. What I've seen change happen, it happens, there's little cracks that sort of happen, and there are areas that are less regulated, less conservative, and the technology sort of just flows there and people can accept it. And I mean, some of the examples, the ticket management industry was not sort of really regulated and legislated, and you can see that evolved way faster. I think now the utility side and the facility owner's ability to collect data, that's pretty wide open. There's not a lot of restrictions around it. Do I think that, one calls as they exist now are just going to change tomorrow? Probably not. That may be one of the slower parts of the industry. There's lots of laws and legislation around it, and there's things that sort of limit it. But when the technology kind of seeps into those cracks, those are the areas where people look and they go, oh, wow, did you see what they're doing? And it kind of opens the doors for it to spread elsewhere.
I was just going to mention when we talk about process, right? Like, process is still the same. We're going out to protect the utilities. Maybe now we don't have to go out all the time. There's some other advancements that we can do. But looking at the process, that's it at a high level. And the amount of things that happen in the process is pretty long and intensive. And if you get detailed, that's how we always make improvements, is looking at the details of this. And I'll just use an example, from on the spot over there, where one of the things we saw as we got cross states, right, multi-states, and we continue to grow, that each call centers were different and had some different, terminology or nomenclature wrapped around the process. And so what we do with our customers is make sure that we have internal, these are our processes, and we try to fit them to them so that it's less to teach your locators out there. For example, for unlocatables, there's a process where only supervisors can do it, and you have a role, whether someone's privileged, to be able to do it. So everyone starts off not being able to abuse some of those things, so that if they're gonna make it unlocatable, they have to explain to their supervisor why it's there. And we've reduced some damages to make some headway just by reducing unlocatables in general, and trying to push off those work and trying to actually solve those details.
So, Jason Manning, you said something about the crowdsourced data. any individual data point may not be accurate, but as you collect the sediments of data over time, it tends to be pretty accurate. I mean, all of us use those sediments of crowdsourced data every day of our lives. Is there, why don't we do that more in this industry? Do we have too much of an all or nothing mentality in this industry? Like, I don't want your sediments of data because not all the sediments are perfect. I mean, what are the barriers to using a kind of a proven data knowledge model, if you will, in our industry?
It's just in my experience, it's been like, that was you nailed it, Jimmy. It's like in my experience, it's been this: if it's not perfect, we can't use it, and people are worried about the liability. People are worried about all sorts of things, and I mean, I guess I can understand it, but when you look at it, when you sort of zoom out and you look at these things on the macro, right? Yes, one person could be whatever, the data could be wrong about where they are in traffic, but when you've got 50,000 vehicles in traffic, all reporting the same thing, it's probably right. You know, the example of the restaurant that closed, or all of those things. There has just been, I think, traditionally, as things like, if we look at facility owners and their GIS departments, there was always this thing that it was like, oh, they're the only people who know how to use it. And we see this as a common theme in IT, right? When people, it's new technology and people don't understand it, it gets controlled by a few people. And then they sort of get to set the rules around it. And I'm not trying to vilify anyone. I think it's a normal sort of reaction for them to have. But as these sort of, as you said, the sediment gets accepted, as people understand that, hey, you know, the reason why my phone gets me through traffic faster is because it's not because some guy 20 years ago set an approved route for traffic. It's because little bits of data are being collected like in real time and helping guide me through city traffic. So as people start to accept that, I think it'll seep into this industry. Those fortresses are still pretty strong, but like I said before, I think it will seep in somewhere where there is less control. People will start to do it. It will get the attention of the industry, and people will start to look at it and go, wow, actually, the best practice is to use real-time data and to collect it from multiple sources and to collate all of this data. And that's the real sort of precision. I think that's how it's going to happen.
I'll tell you this. This is where it seeps in, and this is where we're seeing it. We did screening with GIS for years. We know what our clients look like when they use GIS for screening. Just recently, we started doing screening using no GIS, but only our AI screening. Our AI screening is outpacing our GIS screening. It's because our AI screening is using data that's in real time, and the GIS is using stuff that was done polygons from years ago that were uploaded. Our clients are seeing a bigger return today because the ability to do AI screening on top of the advantage of this. And what's happened is people said, I trust AI because this is, I'm looking at what's happening with my records, and then they go back and screen with GIS to see comparably, and they get a higher percentage rate over here. So when their gut shows what they see is happening, then it starts, as you say, kind of ease in. And that's where we see this first thing going.
I think that's a crucial point you mentioned about AI. I mean, AI doesn't require a 401k. AI doesn't get tired. AI doesn't have sick days. It doesn't have off days. It can just perpetually process. And people can't do that.
And it can sift through, I think, as you said before, just a quantity of data that was inconceivable previously. It was just inconceivable to take all of these different data sets and try to make some sort of sense out of it. And that's actually possible now.
And you can be very eloquent with it, right? You can do, if you don't have great national damage data, but my client keeps really good damages, guess what? My AI gets better because they have better quality data. And then I say, let's do better quality data. And guess what they do? They start spending more money to go gather better field data because they see the return. So it's just that snowball effect that you're trying to get. And I think that's a great way. We're not ever going to start the race and be the most advanced tech in all of the world, right? But what we can do is learn to help people kind of ease into success and then change the narrative, I think, from there.
So easy into success. I totally get it, but it seems like it's taking a lot longer.
Yeah.
I'm
That is correct.
Just keep it real. It's taking a lot longer to ease into success in this space than the other things all of us do almost every day, right? So that's a very positive outlook. But how do we increase that pace of adoption? I've heard get 1 or 2 early adopters, advocates, but what else can be done to ease into success faster in this space? Wow. Is it? Let me
That's
follow
a
up.
really tough
I
one.
think if I knew,
Yeah,
I
we're trying. We're trying hard. There's lots of features out there, and you get out there and spread the good word as much as you can of what everyone's doing. But at the end of the day, there's a cost-benefit analysis that everyone's doing and evolving in real time.
So, Jimmy, I think maybe the answer to your question is, does the industry need to sponsor studies that could be then brought back to everyone? So rather than all of these folks up here trying to find an early adopter, does the industry sort of need to, from a neutral source, go out, commission some studies to say, hey, for the industry, we're very focused on best practices here. Do we need someone to sort of say, this is a unbiased and very neutral approach, scientifically speaking, this is good, to kind of loosen some of that and make it a little easier? Right now, I feel like every technology company out there is kind of trying to beat their own path and convince people that this is the right way. Maybe if the industry is really questioning, are we doing this right? It's maybe the industry needs to sort of take a look at that and report back from a neutral source.
So maybe a neutral source, back to Secretary Adams, maybe a neutral source, maybe you guys, the 4 purveyors of technology, saying use technology, or seen as the salesman saying, these shoes are great, but maybe a third party needs to come in and say, yeah, you need to, this is how you move forward.
I mean, look, in our industry, we've got 50 plus different ways to create a ticket from different one call centers. In our world, I think it's a vendor. I could say if everybody had the same output and input, and then you could take your fields and line them up, what you've done is you've just reduced the maintenance for us to maintain our ticket management systems because of the outbound format and inbound format, but it also has given us unity in the data. These are things that we should be doing as an industry right away. You've got to get through and make your data as equal. We spend more time writing parsing rules because somebody adds a new field and I have to change everything. Whereas if I just had a standard JSON XML or something that would allow me to tie everything together, we would probably take 20% of our development off the books if you want to accelerate this. The other thing is in our industry that we see work is legislation, right? So if you want to know what adaption looks like and you want to speed it up, get good laws, right? And so what we're seeing in Indiana now with real positive response for the first time is we're seeing the conversation change. And I think that's how you accelerate it. Praying and hoping just hasn't worked. I've tried it enough and it just hasn't really gotten across the board.
You still see large municipalities that aren't members, and that's kind of bewildering. Like, how are we supposed to make the next step when we have these individual silos? Fragmentation is not anything specific to the locate industry. That's why Android has a lot of problems versus, the iPhone. And it's just that they're different, really, right?
Consensus is difficult, I think, without people having some kind of incentive. That's, I think, one of the crucial things to all of this. If there isn't some kind of incentive that, we can say generally everyone wants damage prevention to become better, and that should be enough of an incentive. But a lot of times it's not by itself. So gathering consensus is always going to require some kind of incentive.
So one of the safest industries in the US is the commercial airline industry. There was an episode on Freakonomics where you are now more likely to die in a car accident driving to the airport, far more likely than to die on that flight. Okay, so that's how safe it is. And there were 2 things they pointed to on this Freakonomics episode that caused it. One is extensive sharing of data, safety data, not obviously trade secrets, but safety data between airlines and between the airlines and FAA. And the second was the massive amounts of sensors on each plane. So Can you guys talk about that? How are those applicable to our industry? Is there anything we can learn from that? Because I see things like where, we have some innovative sharing of data, and some people are like, this is great, and some people are like, oh, here's a list of 25 things I'm afraid of. Do we do those two things enough in this industry? And if not, how can we do them more? And is this even relevant, right? FAA, commercial flights, how safe they've gotten?
I think so. Someone, said the saying, I'll give him some credit. He's a co-chair of the best practices, but he said you can't copyright safety, right? So if you're doing something that makes you safer and do a better job over here, we need to get to a collaborative kind of approach where we're sharing that as much as possible. And just before, sometimes what makes it hard is that there's so many stakeholders in this industry. There's so many characteristics you have to kind of cater to and so forth. And we try to get to that point, but looking to other industries like that, we need to kind of, what can we take from that and learn from those and bring into ours?
I think Jason said it before about real-time damage data that, and while I applaud the effort to DIRT and everything it's done over the years, but real-time damage data is very much the equivalent of the airlines sharing safety data with the FAA. The other parallel might be, when you talk about the number of sensors on an aircraft, this is what we've sort of been saying is there's so many data points. You wouldn't just base it on a single gauge up in the, take your jumbo jet up in the air, have like a single gauge and go, I think we're good, right? So they're relying on a multitude of data points, and one of them may fail. They may have a sensor on a landing gear that's acting wacky, but that's okay. They've got so many other sources of those data, that they can work with confidence. And that's, I think, what we've all been saying up here is, yeah, we should be using more of those data points and use them kind of in an aggregate to be safer. And sharing that data in real time is exactly, I think, the parallel to what you're talking about with the aviation industry.
In that, say, I watch that one, and I like the Freakonomics. One of the other things I hit on a lot was training and repeating the understanding of that messaging. And I think in the last 2 years, I've really strongly started to believe in that. You can't change behavior unless you can really train properly in that. So I think I see a lot more of that in our industry. What I like is with AI, it allows us to train better. Because now I can identify what's really the challenge. In that Freakonomics episode, one of the things I think they were talking about in the safety of driving was understanding why risk is real, right? And so understanding that being, I think, aware of your drive was important, but the amount of awareness a pilot needed was significantly more important, I guess is the way you look at it. But I don't think the individual driver of the car cares about that. If you get into an accident on the way to the airport, that's a bad thing anyways. But what I did find very compelling is the idea of training and really changing behavior. And I think we're starting to see that CGA starting to have a bigger training thing. I think if we can standardize that, we can standardize hopefully some behavior.
Well, I think people were probably nervous about being that high in the air at one point in time, right? And they had to get their confidence up, and and we got some amazing statistics about the plane. And one of the things too is you can go on and see where T Swift's plane is going at any point in time, and they're sharing their data and they're communicating a lot. And I think those two characteristics is something we can bring in here.
Shane, are you tracking Kayla?
I check. It depends if it's posted or not out there. Kelsey. The in-laws live in KC. So.
As an industry, though, I think we still have a lot of sensors to enable. Think about a gas line that was installed. You look at an inaccurate map because when the line was actually installed, they routed around a tree because they weren't going to cut down that tree. But the original map never got updated. Well, every time someone's out interacting with that line, that's a sensor that should be sending back data.
Yeah.
Whether I've exposed it and I can drop a tape measure down and get a depth, or I'm a locator and I use GPR to find it. Everyone is a sensor. And I think if we can enable those sensors, we get real-time data. And so that line eventually, crowdsourced, starts to move into the position that it actually is. Without that, the next map has the inaccurate line. The next map has the inaccurate line.
You do see it on larger work sites, they might put a camera up there to watch the whole site for the whole time of the job. And, if you could do that for every public locate that was out there, there's quite a few Ring doorbells and stuff. But, when you're watching the site, what happens in our industry is that someone leaves that site, no one watches it, and then someone comes back out there to do more stuff, and we have no idea what happened in between. Right. And so as we bring in the excavators and bring more stuff, we're getting better stories out there. And pictures are something that are really easy to push a button to take and have thousands of pixels of data in it to tell you certain things. And then that's just what you see in the picture, not even what's the data behind it, all that stuff. So there's so many things that we can be capturing out here to kind of improve what we're doing.
So I don't want to single any state out, but I want to talk about Texas because I was sitting next to a gentleman in kind of communications for Texas 811, and I asked him what his biggest initiatives are. And he said, educating some of the Spanish-only speakers who are construction workers in Texas. And I asked him, okay, well, how do you do that? So yeah, a lot of field time, right? So I'm like, okay, but does your site allow someone to enter a ticket in Spanish? And he said, no. And does it give them positive response in Spanish? No. And he says, yeah, a lot of them don't know anything about the 811 system. So I just Googled it. 81% of construction workers in Texas are Hispanic and 71% of them are foreign born. Are we, AI and stuff like that's amazing, right? But are we doing some of the, are we picking some of the lower hanging fruits, right? Like, hey, maybe we have in a state where 71% of workers are Hispanic, foreign born, and maybe only speak Spanish. Do we have Spanish ticket entry for them? Do we have Spanish positive response? Like, are we leveraging like basic technology enough? Like that's lower hanging and probably easier than the, AI where I know so much about what you're doing. I know what direction you're going to go in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, Jimmy, first thing is, I would say that AI, instead of trying to say, hey, this is one issue and we should also look about the language and all that, I'd say, well, wait a second, this is the same issue.
Totally agree.
Right?
And that's what I told them.
Yeah, because the natural language,
Yeah.
we're seeing it right now. We're experimenting with saying, hey, I want to pick up the phone and say, I just want to put a ticket here. I want to build here. And we want to do all natural language to the whole thing. What's brilliant about it is it knows every language, right? I don't have to train my models. I don't need experts in understanding how the way the words convert. It's just really a much better thing. So I think we actually can push the narrative faster with tech. But I'm a tech guy, so I'm going to always tell you that, right? I think what's interesting is the reason that one call is so challenging is that 71% of the workers in Texas don't speak English as their first language. But then you go to Massachusetts and you might find something completely different. So you have to have the ability to be able to deliver solutions for everyone and also cater to those. I love the fact that we have state-run one call centers, but it also is a bit of a challenge. So where the benefit is because it can adapt based on the geography, but the negatives are that we can't work community-wise across all of our centers. We have a lot of clients today that are using Spanish as a primary language lines. And what we've seen is as we increased all of that, we found out we got a better return when we made a better mobile application, because the mobile application could natively change based on the browser settings, and so it could take care of it. So why try to force the argument one way when obviously the audience wanted to go the other way? So I think it's just kind of give and take.
Yeah, it takes time. Like if you try to do that in a local application on a Windows environment, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
But as the technology comes out there, there's already libraries out there that store all this in kind of a dictionary format, and it doesn't matter what language you're really speaking, and you can flip it over at the drop, at the drop of a hat. And we just need to see more of them try that and do that stuff and get to these spots, right? And that's on the call center.
I don't know if our industry knows this, but look at right now, Google's large language model identifies marks on the ground. It can go in and I can show it a picture and it will tell me that is an electric line because I see the red line on an image right now. It's not specifically trained for our industry whatsoever. If you don't think in the next 3 or 4 years that this thing is going to go so much further than it's ever been, you're just in the wrong position. You shouldn't be there, right? Because I just see this thing leapfrogging everything we've accomplished in the last 20.
So let me play devil's advocate there. You've been in this industry for 30 years, and it's been slow adoption up to this point, and it's going to flip in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. The first thing is in the last 30 years, and Jason has talked about this, the value of our industry was only seen within our industry. If we saw some of the large people that have come in, especially private equity dollars that have come into our industry, what we found is that everyone else sees value now in the data. What happens is our data is the primary, most valuable asset of this industry, and it has a lot of value outside of our walls. So that's why we're seeing a large influx of dollars coming in. This is why we need to get into a position to leverage this and take advantage of it for our industry's sake, so we don't lose the value that comes out of here. But yeah, when I say 5 years, I mean it. I'm very confident because one is I've seen it. I think a lot of us have seen similar works where we've seen accuracies in databases that are more accurate than the actual one call center derived by public records. So when that happens, now we're going to have the conversation of saying, why am I building walls at my one call center when the guy next to me has better, more accurate data for free right here? And if he can start trending the data, then he can get all the value of what we have. And so, you know, I guess as a proponent for damage prevention, I'm like trying to raise the flag saying, hey, everybody, let's keep that value here because I want to use that value to reduce damages. Once we do that, then we can retire. Jason, I've been here 30 years. We're going to go out and have a nice dinner together one night.
By the way, if anyone in the audience has a question, please just, I don't have my eyes up back my head, so just sit here and then I'll get to you as soon as I can. Is part of the slower than what you all would like adoption of new technology and methods due to maybe the industry is good enough right now for some stakeholders or many stakeholders? And what I mean is, you know, we know the numbers, approximately how many damages a year, but the construction industry in the US is about $1.4 trillion a year, right? And yes, we would like to get to zero. We'd like to reduce damages by 50%, but there was another session where we were talking about the public, and the response from a panelist was, I don't hear anything from the public about damage prevention, right? Which the optimist view is, yeah, you don't hear anything because it's not an issue for them. So is that part of the challenge? Maybe it's good enough for a lot of the stakeholders and they're not looking for the quantum leap technological method improvements.
I was going to say, you know, that's the tough thing about our industry, trying to paint everyone with the same brush. You know, it's good enough for the homeowner right now, but is it good enough for a multi-state utility owner that, you know, has some serious issues? And I think anytime there's delays and stuff, like we're still a ways away from where we can be in this industry. That's the big thing about, you know, being aware of where we are and where we can be. Yes, it's good enough to hear, but we know that it can get better, or we could just hang out here. But we know that there's still a ton of data that's supposed to be out here to collect, and there's still some high achievers that can really improve that. And we're going to see stuff like, you know, technology adoption, it's almost exponential all the time.
But there's sort of a numbness that I think maybe happens that in this good enough, right? So probably the same. From year one that I was in the industry, there was an issue called late locates, right? 30 some odd years later, still top of the list, late locates. I mean, so this sort of sounds like the issue you said before about the, you know, okay, well, you can't change the route, you can't change any of the points, you can't change it. So if that's the approach we're going to take, then I guess we're willing to live with late locates. Maybe they're not late enough for people to really want to look at it and go, well, how do you change this? So but I think that comes from kind of a numbness where people just go, oh yeah, that again, and they sort of move on, and it's difficult with these things that just they're always there to stop and go, well, wait a minute, let's actually look at this and fix it. So I think that for all the good that it does, I think the industry is maybe guilty of a little bit of kind of being a little bit complacent maybe about some of these issues that have just been around for so long they feel impossible to fix.
From a locator vendor standpoint, I think that I don't know if is the technology good enough, but I think a lot of people are financially, is it affordable? The additional training that's going to take place, the equipment that's involved. I think that some people have the perspective, is this replacing my job? You know, so there's always that in the back of their mind. So I think those are some of the things that people think about, that they're resistant to technology and not wanting to move forward.
So, getting back to the two gentlemen who actually do work. Just kidding. What if given a magic wand? Okay. And I ask you, here's a magic wand. What technologies would dramatically improve you and your team's performance in the field for damage prevention? I hate to put you guys on, but like, you guys are the ones out there doing it, right? So
They're already doing the only people on the panel doing work, and now you're giving them real work.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem fair.
all right.
I think devices that can more accurately or more quickly identify underground utilities, whatever that looks like, whether eventually there's a movement from individual interpretation to more autonomous interpretation of the data. Different types of devices that we might not even think about today, that are being used in different ways in different organizations. I used to run a pipeline inspection business, and we started to combine a simple caliper tool with an ultrascan tool. And the combination of the two produced different types of data like we'd never had access to before. And so a big oil company could now see things about their pipeline well in advance of a bad outcome. So I would say those two things are really interesting in my mind, just interpretation and combination.
You know what I saw, Jimmy, that I want? I was at Ohio State and I watched the farming group there, one of the most advanced, I think, technology groups in the world. And they were showing their new drones, and they've changed the spray on the drone nozzle to deliver fertilizer. So it saved them hundreds of gallons. But I watched it. This thing has the capability of spraying a square mile all the way through, up to an accurate of a millimeter. So it could locate. I just don't understand how we just don't go out with a truck. You guys pull up with your truck and these drones go out and it marks everything and then it flies off. It seems to me that would be the obvious next play, but I'm not in the locating business, so I don't know.
Or the robo dog. Or the dog, you know.
But I do like gadgets.
But it's not an easy problem. There's so much context
Oh,
around
sure.
that's valuable to that interpretation today.
Listen, we don't work, so I think we're just trying to find a way not to work more. So.
I think one of the other key opportunities is at the moment, you know, a typical locate process, you select your frequency, you hook up, and you go and trace that one frequency. There's going to be a time when you can locate multiple frequencies at the same time. And that's going to be allowing the locator to leverage the power of all of them frequencies simultaneously to paint a complete picture of what's going on. And that's going to be a massive time save.
I think too, integrating different types of utility locating. You're talking about GPRS, and that's affected by wet soil and clay conditions as opposed to electromagnetic. Combining those 2 or 3 different types of data collection machinery that can facilitate a better product, I think, is something that would help. Talking about narrowing down the utility and being more accurate.
So we have an audience. We have an audience member with a question. Before I get to him, kind of a follow-up question. Mark, you mentioned a device that can do multi-frequencies at the same time. Will that help Steve with the more accurate? Would you say a more accurate device that can locate?
I think absolutely. I think it could be massively beneficial because one, it's a time save. You're not having to continuously go back and forth to the transmitter and switch frequencies. And 2, when you combine frequencies together and stack them, you would be amazed at what more information you will get and what you will be able to see that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. So switching between frequencies, you may see something, you may not, but combining them is a multiplier effect and you'll end up being able to leverage that data in a much more comprehensive way to deliver a map that's, just significantly more accurate. And I think one of the keys that's going to have to come along with that is to be able to quantify how certain it is where any given utility is. And that takes away the guesswork from the locator, which will make them feel more confident in the job they're doing, because it's not like, did I do the right thing? Did I put the paint in the right place? The data's been captured and it can be, analyzed after the fact. And you can generate a map that way that will be, more powerful than anything else you can gather.
So is that another final follow-up before we get to audience member? Is that another example of just collecting a massive amount of data and leveraging AI to interpret that data? Is that another example of that kind of what we talked about for some of the other technologies?
In a sense, yes. I think, obviously, as I said before, if you're going to make any decision, no one wants less information. You want to try and gather as much information. A lot of people will wait till the last minute until they can gather as much information as possible to make that decision. And oftentimes you'll make a more informed and better outcome decision when you have more information. So having that information will lead to better decisions.
I'm just going to add to that too. Like, when you go out and like Jeff said, using the GPR to verify an unlocatable, it's like, we want this decision because we don't want to make the same mistake twice. That's when it's really bad. Mistakes are still going to happen. We're trying to get some zeros, and there's still a long ways to go, but we're working hard, whether Jimmy thinks so or not, But using that data to improve the next scenario and the next scenario, some we talk about. So like taking the initiative, say, hey, I don't know there. I can't just shuck it off kind of thing, but I need to figure out what's there so that we can not have this issue next time. And then taking that little bit longer today makes it a little bit easier for tomorrow.
All right, thank you. We have a question from an audience member. Please introduce yourself, name, company name, and then ask your question.
Yep. Hi, I'm Bob Bishop from PelicanCorp. Thank you all for being here. My question is regarding the pace of adoption. And we've had conversations like this quite some time where we've talked about collecting data, sharing data, data quality, all those type of things. This question's for the whole panel. If you had to select one stakeholder group to lead the charge of adoption, to be the first ones to move that everybody else would follow, what stakeholder group is that in your opinion?
And why?
And why? Yeah.
We work for the excavator, and I think by changing the conversation to value for the excavator, they will really lead the conversation, less about preventing the damage, but more about helping them deliver on time, on budget, safely, protecting their reputation. We do that, we will eliminate damages in the process. So I think they're the stakeholder I would focus on.
I agree with Steve. I think it's the excavator, Jimmy talks about it all the time, they're the ones that, are getting the free service are not that much considered. So they have a big jump they can do. And whether they're collecting GPS, if we want to expand validity periods on how long we can go without having to go out and refresh paint or so forth, we're going to get some of that confidence there to be able to kind of assess things.
Well, if Jason isn't going to say it, I'll say it. 70% of all excavators work for utility companies, right? So most of the work's being done on behalf of the utility company. Utility companies have money, right? They fund the one call centers. While I do love the excavator, I do think we expand functionality. We're actually expanding our product lines because now we're going into like property management, earth land management, one of our things. But the reality of it is you focus on the stakeholders that actually the utility owners that have it, because they are the core, at least in my opinion, the core thing that can actually move the needle.
I agree there. I think the facility owners, they're responsible for putting it in the ground, for maintaining it. They are behind most of the excavation that's happening, and they have the resources to do it.
And they have the roads on boards and in our industry as well.
For me, I think it's a combination for sure. I think it's got to be distributed across the board with all stakeholders. Who's going to make the most impact? Hard to say. Depends on any given scenario. In some situations, sure, empowering the excavators with more information is going to yield better results. But a lot of times, the utility owners need to, present the information that they have and collect the information that they have and distribute that information to mitigate damages.
I think I lean more toward the facility owner. I think that we go out there and we try to prove the prints right or prove them wrong. And if there's something that there's a discrepancy there, that we try to get those updated and just create the most accurate print for our customer. So but it helps the excavator in the end. Got good marks and good paint on the ground.
Like a lot of utilities are the excavators too, right? Like doing the work. I think it's crazy sometimes. They will, preach to the choir and stuff and then have a weak contract with their subcontractor that's doing the work where they don't have to do any of this stuff. And it's like, you've got it all right over here, and then you go to this little silo over here and you just disregard something there. And it's trying to have that big picture at all points in time to be able to consider everyone. It's, the utilities are a big driving factor, and I've seen some where they aren't even putting the email addresses in at the call center, and they're pushing the technology, but they're also being the one to kind of hold it back. So maybe I changed my vote a little bit. It's kind of split hairs.
So most of you, thank you, Bob. Most of you said the utilities. Let's call them the facility owners, right? Just in general. I'm assuming you're including telcos in those in utilities. I think Jason Adams said they're the ones funding the 811 ecosystem, the 811 centers. They're the one locating either directly or paying someone to. They're on the boards. They really control the boards, right? Why are they not adopting some of these technologies? And I also heard someone say ROI. So let's assume the utilities are rational actors, right? Most of them are investor-owned utilities, so you have to assume they're rational actors. Why are they not adopting some of these technologies, assuming that your technologies are providing positive ROI? Right? You do a business case, Mr. Investor-owned utility. By using my technology, you'll get 35% ROI. And are they saying no, or are they saying, I don't believe that business case? I mean, what's going on here? Are they rational or not? And they control the system, right?
There may be some element there of, conservative and risk avoidance. So you're always, you can think of it in just about every industry. People hesitate to move on to the next thing because if you do the thing that's proven, no one's going to call you out and say, this is your fault, you made a bad decision. Because you can easily say, this is what every predecessor of mine has done. They've done this for the past 50 years.
No one got fired for buying IBM.
No one got fired. Exactly. No one gets fired for buying IBM, right? So there's a risk factor in being kind of avant-garde and adopting something new, because if it flops, then that's on you. And when you're in the realm of public safety, when we're talking about newspaper headlines because something blew up or there was a fatality, I don't think anyone wants to be the guy who's like, he tried something new and that's on him. And I have to think that just from a human nature standpoint, yes, the facility owners are rational actor. They are, I think, rational actors. I think when you get down to the individuals making the calls and approving the things, they are humans and they have that same fear of change and the burden of responsibility and the sense of liability. And I think that makes it difficult to move, which may be one of the reasons to get back to, like if there's industry funded, hey, this is the new best practice. And if you're following that, that kind of shields those people in a sense from their personal kind of risk of, hey, I'm going to be at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge maybe of this, and then they're able to sort of rely on science says this is the way to go. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, one thing that's curious, and I don't know if you've seen this, but I have, and I have a lot of clients, and I don't want to make anyone upset, but the reality is the board members that I have worked with over the last 20 years, the quality of the position and the title that they carry within their own company has been reduced. When I first started working, we would have maybe not C-level people, but we would definitely have somebody that was a president or a vice president that would represent the utility member on the board. And now, no offense, but now we're seeing supervisors, we're seeing GMs, we're seeing stuff that may not have maybe the depth when it comes to making long-term business decisions that may be in the best interest of the one call center. So I've seen that quite a bit. And You know, and I think even my relationships with the one call centers, they've now started to apply rules to say certain qualifications that were going to be required by that, because you need forward thinkers, but you also have to people can understand that investment sometimes, especially in technology and what we do, has longer term ROI. And it's hard to do that when you're just stuck in the weeds in front of you every day. So that's one thing I'd like to see better doing.
I think we're starting to see a little bit of change here. Like GPS was around a long time ago too, right? And you'd come in, I remember, you know, I've been here 11 years. My first kind of conference, I'd go in there, there'd be the GPS guy over there and the ticket management guy over here and the one guy over there. And now we're starting to see, hey, all three of those in one booth, right? And start to be a little bit collected before. So I sometimes think it's a little unfair to say we're not there, because you're starting to see other people. We might cycle back to where it gets some importance, because GIS data is another level of data. It's not just specific to the locate industry. That data is used in so many platforms, whether there's cross-checking permits, you know, or CityWorks. These things are like platforms that are just built around having good GIS to supplement everything you do. So I think we're starting to see a natural more adoption of people to start to realize the ROI on good collected GIS data that helps us for tomorrow. It's going to take a long time still, because we have so many stakeholders. But I think now more than ever, you know, we're not just talking about data as GPS, we're talking about metadata and all these other things. So I think we're headed in a good direction. And over the last couple of years, you started to see a little bit of an acceleration. And I know with COVID too, that really pushed some people to some more digital solutions. And, you know, as we keep chipping away, technology will get cheaper, those ROIs will get higher. And there's a lot of stuff and buzz going on. A lot of people, you see everyone bringing in GPS. So sometimes it can be, the decisions can take a long time, to be sure.
Great, thank you. If we go back to locating, a lot of people think of locating as finding where underground facilities are and putting paint on the ground, right? But isn't locating really just communicating, in a more general sense, just communicating to the excavator where the facilities are and where they're not, right? And the method that was chosen 35, 40 years ago was putting paint on the ground where the lines, where the facilities are. Think about technologies, new future technologies and methods, you know, the topic of this panel. Is putting paint on the ground the best or only way to communicate that in 2024 going forward?
There might
not.
even be a step before that. Does the person know that they need paint? I think there's still a huge awareness gap in the industry of people not even recognizing that the services are available and then engaging with those services, whether that's on the public or the private side. So if everybody knew and was aware, then I think this is the right question.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing to me, I still like people use the paint on the ground as a communication tool. Like say you put OK on the ground in some obscure spot in this large project area, and that's almost sufficing, you know, and it's such a data way. We've gone way past that where we're sending clearance messages and more information on top of that. The paint's an additional. We're still painting OK in some spots and using that as a form of communication.
I mean, I'm going to say I think it's probably not. And if we looked at it, to be realistic, and this takes nothing away from the locators and their skills and what they do, but I'm old enough to remember when, if you were traveling somewhere, you went to a gas station, you bought a map and you unfolded it, and you know, like that, and that's what you had to do at the time because that was the preferred method. And just, you know, trying to drive and have this out, no one would even consider doing that now because there's so much better technology. Because you can get real-time information. You just punch your address into your phone and it tells you exactly where to go. And not just that, but what the fastest way to get there is and where you can stop for coffee along the way. The information is the same. The method of delivering it used to be, well, we're going to print up maps and stick them in gas stations. It's just kind of an antiquated way of doing things. The goal is, as you said, you know, where are the utilities and where are they not? Is paint on the ground the easiest way to do that? Probably not. It's you know, gets washed away. People pull flags. There's all sorts of things that happen that mean that that's probably not the ideal way to do it because technology has provided far better solutions.
I mean, yeah, why don't we have VR goggles that are, I mean, look, I golf with a VR club and I put this headset on and I do all that kind of stuff. And I always wonder why we're just not going out there with our digital equipment, capturing digital records. So then I can put a digital device on my head and go look and say, there's a line there and there. Because if I started building out that land base and I had all of those records, from now on, the next time I go to locate, I could just walk out there and say, this is where I'm digging. I could walk right there and I can see where it is. I could walk around the tree. That's what we should be building.
I mean, part of the noise in the industry that leads to a lot of the, whatever you want to call them, junk tickets or excess sort of work being done and occupying locators and late locates is because something as simple as the marks have disappeared and now I need to call in a new ticket. And that is expense and time and effort from everyone when it's only because of an antiquated method for.
And there's not one call center in the world today that takes rain into consideration. And we're trying to build it in, but let's be real. I mean, it's now we've been doing this 30 years and it's rained every time during those 30 years. So it's like, why we haven't put that in at this point?
I think it comes back to a level of comfortability with paint, and it's not going to go away in the short term, but long term, I think we have to be leaving the job site with a lot more than empty paint cans.
Is the paint really like the liability line? Like you still get a lot of people taking a picture and then measuring it off right to that paint. They're not measuring off the photo. They're not going into the map and so forth. Like I think that there's kind of a responsibility there that keeps us as a paint. It's not so much of like, here's where it is, but here's where I'm committing to where it is.
And that's back to the point I made earlier where it's, it's interpretation. So that paint mark, is that where the utility is? Are you sure that's where it is?
Yeah.
If we don't know for sure, I think when you collect more information and deliver something that's not just paint on the ground, that's when you can deliver something that's more accurate and you can go back there. The weather doesn't come into effect. If the paint mark gets washed away, you still have a digital record of where that utility was.
Exactly. You should get both right now in the short term to help, breathe the long term, right? If I'm an excavator and I'm asked to maintain these marks and then I get a rain right after you left the site, I haven't had a chance. Right, you're really kind of putting them in a situation where they have no chance to maintain those marks. So they're going to call in right away for the remark and take your resources again.
Thank you. We have a question from audience member. Can you please state your name and company and ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Brandon Long with On the Spot Utility Resources. My question is, do you guys, as a collective, more for the programming side, take into account some of the literacy rates within the different states, and how does that impact development moving forward, especially with a large portion of those potential individuals being the ones that are tasked to work and excavate around these critical infrastructures?
I'll start on it. One of our primary offerings of my last company called 4IQ was we were building a training system to take college students to become doctors, and it failed miserably. We did awful with it, but we pivoted and turned it into a training platform for this industry, and it teaches by competency. And so what we found is we're able to really work with people who have various backgrounds, and we can do levels of testing and training. So not only can we show them how to be a really good locator, but we can also figure out how to teach them well, right? So some people like reading, some people like to see movies, some people want interactive. In our system, you can have various different ways to go to it, but it's also really good because we can also tell who's our strongest learners and who's not. And then we can adjust dynamically so that the training get there. Because the purpose of training is not to say you're dumb. Purpose of training is to say, I want to make you good, right? And so that's what we do. So we just got to figure that out. So at least in our world, we spend a significant amount of time on trying to get that value. But we've only been doing it for the last couple of years. Like I said, I've been in here for a very long time, but just the last 2 years have we really put some focus on it.
You think there's fragmentation in the call centers? Check out, Esri symbology across a whole bunch of utilities. And sometimes, you got so many different utilities and that one symbol is used for 20 different things across them all, right? And so, we like to provide a legend and kind of information to the map, to make sure that not only are we saying words in English, but we're also showing some images and some things that people that might not speak English will be more familiar about. And we see, good reception to things like that, where like, I want more information, I want the English and maybe the Spanish and the map and so forth, so I can really paint a good picture.
To your point, Shane, I think it's important to remove as much ambiguity as possible from any kind of training program, and to still, it's the whole old adage of, if I had longer, I would have wrote you a shorter letter. So, the more time you spend refining the message and getting it dialed down, the more digestible it's going to be to anyone that's being educated on anything.
I think tech does actually a pretty good job of taking very complex things and sort of distilling them down to something very simple and very intuitive. And I think that, this industry is making, there's certainly an effort to do that as well. So I actually think tech already does a great job of that. I guess my proof would be, give any 3-year-old an iPhone and they figured it out right away. And that's because it's intuitive. It's not because they have some sort of magical power. So I think as every part of the process goes through that same kind of thinking where trying to make things really simple. And a lot of times I know that we struggle with trying to make something intuitive. And then we've got all of these, well, we need to ask this and we need to do this because we've always done it that way. And it's kind of in the way, but there's definitely an effort to try to simplify those things and make them just dead simple. And I think tech is already doing a decent job of that.
Let me follow up on that. Thank you, Brendan. Tech in general does a decent job of that, but does tech in this space do a good enough job of that? Here's what I mean. We have A11 locating company, I won't mention a name, but who are hiring new people and they're training them for 2-3 weeks and then they're out there doing tickets, right? And they got a device that has many different frequencies. They're teaching them electromagnetic theory to physics to people who didn't complete college, right? Are we doing enough with tech in this space, not on your iPhone, but in this space, to make it easier for a broad audience to be able to actually do their job more efficiently, safer, with a less steep learning curve? And I especially want to get, again, the two gentlemen who have people in the field using some of these
Who
technologies.
work for a living, the guys
who are actually working for a living, guys. But like in this space, guys.
Today, for video pipe inspection technology, CCTV cameras, we're seeing AI start to move in and do some of the real-time interpretation of data. Today, there's a beautiful van full of screens and control arms, and that tech is running through the pipe and then categorizing every defect. I ran into a raccoon. I found a root. Now AI can run through everything and identify those defects. I think those are the kind of small incremental changes that we see that open up a lot of bandwidth for our employees as they're out in the field. Honestly, it makes their job more pleasurable as well. Because now I can be more focused on the things that are great about my job and can spend less time doing those things that are hardship.
Jeff, you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think you tailor it to who you're trying to teach those things to when you're talking about introducing conductors and just simplifying the processes to make it more user friendly so that it is more teachable and it's not overwhelming, because technology can be that way with some people. So you want to make it as easy as it can and user friendly for those field personnel who may not have that type of skill set. So.
Yeah, I was going to look at CGA starting a full training session now, right? Excavator training all the way through, introducing that content. I think it's the first time I've seen kind of a really large push on a national level. But I'll just look from examples that we have. We have clients that don't use our platform, that use our training, who have taken the onboarding time for somebody from 6 weeks to 3 weeks. So I think that there's real, in this industry, Jimmy, I would say, I never see us as struggling, right? It's not like that people are ignoring this. I think the questions we have is we have to be a little more conservative because people's lives are at risk. And so I've never been a huge proponent of winning the race just to win it. What I really want to do is win it safely and get across. So I think one of the things that we need to look at is saying, are we training properly? If not, can we get more value out of it? And then why? And And I think I would love for us to spend more time focusing on the guys that actually work. Because it seems like, to me, our most valuable asset in the industry are the boots on the ground now, because those are the guys that are going to be collecting the most valuable data. So all of us are sitting here waiting for accuracy from them, because we're going to automate a lot of this. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of us trust anything more than boots there with highly accurate equipment that gets validated multiple times. Once we start to do all that, we can make more efficiencies in everything we do. But we need to really put focus on these guys right now and give them the best tech to get out in the field to really start making a difference.
And there is a real benefit to field to finish solutions. If that data is going into a platform that can give feedback to those operators, it makes a big difference in their ability to perform the next job, not the next month, but in that afternoon.
That afternoon,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
We find different things like, the poor locators out there, they also have to be IT experts sometimes, right? I mean, everyone, I always tell them, listen, the new world, everyone has to learn how to operate their hotspot. That's a thing that we're all kind of involved. But when it comes to the other things, software should be, so easy to use that it's really speeding up some of that time out there. And I think that there's some tools that, are really helping these guys speed up, because you want to finish it from the field. You close that thing off, because just as we want to be real time on the front end, when we get that information closed in the field, we need to be sending that quickly loops, right? Instead of putting the okay and waiting for someone to go out there. So we'll tell the excavator, we'll tell the call center, we'll do like 15 communications from a single locate without the locator having to do anything.
I think there's always an opportunity to, any technology provider can try and abstract something and make it, retreat to simplicity. Essentially, retreating to simplicity often means making the device more complicated under the hood, but easier to interpret for the user. So I think, that's a powerful thing that has to basically be done, because, the more that is done, the more effective and efficient you can make the boots on the ground, essentially.
All right, and on that note, we're out of time. Can we get a hand for these fine panelists, please? Thank you all for enduring an hour and a half of questions, double the length, because you guys are all-stars. Thanks to everyone who's watching on the live stream, and we'll be back next time for more roundtables and discussions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good job.